The golden Cagelena Montenegro had never imagined that love could feel so suffocating. Standing in the marble-floored kitchen of the Ashworth mansion, she carefully arranged delicate porcelain cups on a silver tray, her hands trembling slightly. The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows should have felt warm. But instead, it highlighted the shadows under her eyes and the way her wedding ring had grown loose on her finger. 3 years ago, she had been Alina Vasquez, a beloved elementary school teacher in the small coastal town of Mendocino. Her students adored her gentle patience, and her tiny apartment overlooking the harbor had been filled with handmade crafts and the scent of sea salt. That was before Marcus Ashworth walked into her life during a tech conference she'd attended. To learn about educational software, Marcus had been different, then passionate, about using technology to bridge educational gaps, genuinely interested in her work with disadvantaged children. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of late-night conversations about changing the world and quiet walks along the beach. When he proposed on the same harbor where she'd grown up, Alina believed she was the luckiest woman alive. The early months of marriage had been blissful. Marcus would bring her coffee in bed, listen intently to her stories about adapting to high society, and defend her when his social circle made subtle comments about her background. He had promised that her humble origins didn't matter, that her heart was what made her beautiful. But success changed Marcus. As his tech company expanded globally and his social media following grew into millions, the man who once found her simplicity refreshing began to see it as embarrassing. As the dinner parties became more frequent, the guest lists more exclusive, and Alina found herself increasingly pushed to the margins of conversations about art collections, European vacations. In business acquisitions, she couldn't understand. The final blow came 6 months ago, when Vivian Castleberry entered their lives. Tall, stunning, and armed with an MBA from Wharton, Vivian positioned herself as a business consultant specializing in lifestyle branding for wealthy entrepreneurs. She moved through their social circle like a predator, all glossy hair and designer clothing, speaking Marcus's new language of influence and empire building. Alina watched helplessly as Marcus became enchanted by Vivian's sophisticated charm and ambitious plans for expanding his personal brand. Business dinners turned into late-night strategy sessions. Weekend trips became networking opportunities that Alina wasn't qualified to attend. Slowly, systematically, Vivian carved out a place in Marcus's life while making Alina feel increasingly inadequate and unwelcome in her own home. Now, as Alina carried the tea tray toward the sunroom where Marcus and Vivian were discussing their latest collaboration, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The confident teacher who had once commanded a classroom full of energetic children had been replaced by a ghost of a woman tiptoeing through her own life. She paused, remembering her grandmother's words. Mia, a woman who loses herself in love, was never truly loved at all. Taking a deep breath, Alina pushed open the sunroom door, ready to serve tea to the woman who was systematically stealing her husband and her life. Shadows and Whispers' grandmother Rosalind Ashworth had been watching from her wing of the mansion for months, her sharp blue eyes missing nothing despite her 82 years. From her favorite armchair by the bay window, she had observed the subtle transformation of her family's dynamics with the keen insight of someone who had navigated decades of high society. Politics and business intrigue this morning, as she sipped her Earl Grey and pretended to read her leather-bound copy of Jane Austen. Rosalind witnessed Alina serving tea to Vivian with the quiet dignity of a woman trying to preserve her last shreds of self-respect. The sight made her jaw clench with barely contained fury. She had raised Marcus better than this, or so she had thought. Rosalind remembered Alina's first dinner at the mansion. How the young woman had asked thoughtful questions about the family's philanthropic work. How she had noticed and complimented the small details others overlooked, like the antique music box collection or the faded photographs of Rosalind's late husband. Alina possessed something rare in their world, genuine warmth without agenda. Vivian, on the other hand, had immediately set off every alarm bell in Rosalind's considerable experience. The woman was too perfect, too prepared with exactly the right answers, too eager to position herself as indispensable. Rosalind had built a fortune alongside her late husband, by learning to read people. And Vivian Castleberry read like a carefully crafted fiction that evening. Rosalind made a phone call to Jonathan Whitmore, a discreet private investigator she had used for years to vet potential business partners and suitors for her grandchildren. His voice was respectful, but intrigued when she explained what she needed. "I want to know everything about Vivian Castleberry. Her real background, her finances, her previous relationships, her actual qualifications, everything she's told my family, and everything she hasn't. Of course, Mrs. Ashworth, how deep should I dig?" "Deep enough to find the truth, Jonathan, and quickly. I fear my grandson is being played by a professional." While waiting for the investigation results, Rosalind began her own subtle reconnaissance. She started joining Marcus and Vivian for their morning meetings, claiming she wanted to understand the new direction of the company. Vivian's discomfort was palpable, though she hid it well behind practiced smiles and deferential comments about respecting the family's wisdom. During these sessions, Rosalind noticed discrepancies in Vivian's stories, her supposed previous clients didn't quite add up. Her references to exclusive schools seemed rehearsed, and her knowledge of certain business practices was surprisingly shallow for someone with her claimed experience. More troubling were the financial documents. Rosalind glimpsed during one meeting, Vivian was proposing investment structures that would essentially funnel company money through her consulting firm before reaching their intended destinations. When Rosalind casually questioned the complexity, Vivian smoothly explained it was for tax optimization and brand protection. But Rosalind hadn't built a business empire by accepting smooth explanations for suspicious practices. She also watched how Vivian treated the household staff with barely concealed condescension that contrasted sharply with Elena's consistent kindness to everyone in the mansion. The way Vivian spoke to Elena was particularly revealing, never directly rude, but with a subtle, patronizing tone that made it clear she considered the younger woman beneath notice. The breakthrough came when Jonathan called with his preliminary findings. Vivian's last 3 consulting relationships had ended badly, with wealthy men losing significant amounts of money through investment schemes she had recommended. One had resulted in a lawsuit that was settled quietly out of court. "There's more, Mrs. Ashworth," Jonathan said. "I found evidence that she's been systematically working her way through circles of wealthy, influential men. She targets those who are married or in committed relationships, positions herself as indispensable, and then manipulates them into financial arrangements that benefit her." Rosalind felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. She had been right about Vivian, but more importantly, she now had the ammunition needed to protect her family and restore Elena to her rightful place. The revelation, the autumn air was crisp as Rosalind carefully planned what she privately called the reckoning. She had spent 2 weeks reviewing Jonathan's comprehensive report, which painted a damning picture of Vivian's calculated deceptions. The woman had left a trail of broken relationships and depleted bank accounts across 3 states, each following an identical pattern of seduction, manipulation, and financial exploitation. Rosalind chose the monthly family dinner as her stagia, tradition she had maintained for 30 years, where business was typically forbidden. This evening, however, she made an exception. She had invited Elena's childhood friend David, who was visiting from Mendocino, ostensibly to hear about his nonprofit work with coastal communities. In reality, she wanted Elena to have an ally present for what was about to unfold as they gathered in the formal dining room. Rosalind noted the seating arrangement with bitter irony. Marcus had placed Vivian to his right, the position traditionally reserved for Elena, while relegating his wife to the far end of the table near David. Elena looked pale but composed, wearing a simple navy dress that emphasized her natural grace despite the obvious weight loss and dark circles under her eyes. Vivian commanded attention as usual, regaling the table with stories about her latest branding initiatives, dropping names of celebrities she claimed to advise. She wore a stunning red dress that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing expressively as she spoke. "Darling," Vivian said to Marcus, her voice carrying just enough intimacy to make Elena flinch. "I've been thinking about the European expansion. We should consider establishing the Foundation headquarters in Monaco for tax advantages." Rosalind set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. How fascinating, Vivian. Tell me, how did your previous client, Sebastian Thornfield, feel about your Monaco recommendations? The question hung in the air like smoke. Vivian's composure flickered for just a moment. Micro-expression that revealed surprise and calculation before her practiced smile returned. I'm sorry, I don't recall discussing Mr. Thornfield with you, Vivian said carefully. No, you wouldn't have, Rosalind replied, reaching for a manila folder beside her plate. Sebastian Thornfield lost $2.3 million following your investment. Advice before his wife discovered your personal relationship with him. The subsequent divorce was quite messy, I understand. Marcus frowned, looking between his grandmother and Vivian. Grandmother, what are you? I'm protecting our family. Marcus. Rosalind opened the folder, revealing photographs, financial documents, and legal papers. Just as I protected it from Charles Brennan, who lost his yacht in his Southampton house after following Vivian's guidance. From Michael Rossetti, whose restaurant chain collapsed after investing in the shell companies she recommended. Vivian's face had gone white beneath her makeup. This is preposterous. I don't know what kind of private investigator you hired, but these are obvious fabrications. Jonathan Whitmore is many things. But he's not a fabricator, Rosalind interrupted smoothly. He's particularly thorough when investigating people. Who threatened my family? Should I continue, or would you prefer to explain how Victoria Castellano became Vivian Castleberry? The name change happened right after the Brennan lawsuit, didn't it? The silence was deafening. Elena stared at Vivian. With dawning understanding, while Marcus looked like a man watching his world collapse, David reached over and gently took Elena's hand, offering silent support. The Monaco Foundation was brilliant, actually. Rosalind continued conversationally. Would have given you access to Marcus's trust fund under the guise of international charity work. Very sophisticated. You've refined your methods since the cruise ship incident with poor Mr. Thornfield. Stop, Marcus said hoarsely. This can't be. Vivian, tell her this isn't true. But Vivian had recovered enough to realize the game was over. Her mask finally dropped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Your grandson was pathetically easy to manipulate, she said with venom. And some strategic lingerie. And he was ready to hand over his entire inheritance. Men like him always are. She turned to Elena with unconcealed contempt. And using there like a wounded lamb, too weak to fight for your own husband. You deserve exactly what you got. Elena stood slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. For the first time in months, her voice was steady and clear. You're right about one thing, Vivian. I do deserve better than this. Much better. Without another word, Elena walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a stunned Marcus, a satisfied Rosalind, and a woman whose carefully constructed life had just crumbled around her designer shoes. Finding her voice, Lena packed her belongings in silence, her movements deliberate and calm despite the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. Each item she folded into her simple canvas suitcase represented a piece of herself she was reclaiming. The designer clothes Marcus had bought her remained in the walk-in closet. She wanted nothing that would remind her of the woman she had allowed herself to become. David sat quietly in the corner armchair, occasionally handing her items or simply offering his steady presence. They had been best friends since childhood, bonding over shared dreams of making the world better through education. While Elena had married into wealth, David had stayed true to their original path, building a network of community learning centers along the California coast. I should have come to visit sooner, David said softly as Elena carefully wrapped a framed photo of her grandmother, the only family heirloom. I wouldn't have listened, Elena. Elena replied honestly, was so convinced. That love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant disappearing into someone else's vision of who I should be. Abuela always said that a woman who loses herself has never truly been found by the right person. A soft knock interrupted them. Rosalind entered carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of gentle determination. Despite her revelation, at dinner, she looked somehow lighter, as if exposing Vivian's deception had lifted a weight from her shoulders. Elena, dear, I owe you an apology, Rosalind began, settling into the window seat. I should have acted sooner. I watched you shrinking. day by day, and told myself I was being patient, waiting for the right moment. But there's no right moment to stop cruelty. Lena paused in her packing. You saved our family tonight. That's what matters. No, you saved yourself by walking away. It took more courage than anything I did. Rosalind opened the portfolio. I have a proposition. I've been wanting to establish an educational foundation focused on underserved communities. I need someone who understands both the challenges these children face and how to create real solutions. She handed Alina a document. This is a preliminary funding proposal. $5 million to start, with the potential for much more if the programs prove successful. I want you to run it. Alina stared at the papers, her hands trembling slightly. Rosalind, I can't accept charity. This isn't charity. It's an investment in someone I trust. You have a master's degree in education, 8 years of classroom experience, and more integrity than anyone I've met in decades of business. Foundation would be yours to build however you see fit. David leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. Alina, this could fund the mobile learning labs we always talked about. Imagine taking technology and arts programs directly to communities that have never had access. Over the next hour, they discussed possibilities that made Elena's heart race with forgotten ambition. Programs for migrant children, literacy initiatives for adults, scholarship funds for students like she had once been. For the first time in months, Alina felt the spark of purpose returning. 3 days later, Alina stood on the cliffs overlooking Mendocino, breathing in the salt air that had shaped her childhood. She had rented a small apartment above the town's bookstore, a cozy space with windows facing the harbor and walls she could fill with her own dreams again. Marcus had called repeatedly, sending flowers, letters, and even showing up at her door with tear-filled apologies. But Alina had learned to distinguish between remorse and genuine change. His pleas focused on his own pain, his loneliness, his realization of what he had lost, never on understanding the damage he had caused or becoming the partner she deserved. David arrived that evening with takeout from his favorite childhood restaurant and updates on their foundation plans. As they spread documents across her small kitchen table, mapping out their vision for reaching children in remote coastal communities, Alina felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete alignment between her values and her actions. Dar. You scared? David asked as they watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and coral. Alina considered the question seriously. Terrified, she admitted. But it's the good kind of fear, the kind that comes with growth instead of shrinking. For 3 years, I was afraid of taking up too much space, of being too much or not enough. Now I'm afraid of not becoming everything I'm capable of being. She smiled, feeling truly peaceful for the first time since her wedding day. That's a much better kind of fear to live with. New Horizons. 2 years later, Lena stood before a crowd of 300 at the annual Coastal Education Summit, her voice strong and confident as she presented the Rosalind Foundation's achievements. The mobile learning labs had reached over 2,000 children across 15 rural communities, while their adult literacy program had helped hundreds of parents earn their GEDs. She wore a simple but elegant dress in ocean blue, her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the quiet confidence in her eyes. The scared, diminished woman who had once served tea to her husband's mistress was gone, replaced by someone who had remembered her own worth. Education isn't just about test scores, Alina told the audience. It's about showing children that their dreams matter, regardless of their zip code or their parents' bank accounts. The applause was thunderous. In the back of the room, David beamed with pride, surrounded by their team of passionate educators and community organizers they had assembled. The foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations, earning recognition from the State Department of Education and attracting additional funding from unexpected sources. As the evening reception began, Lena mingled easily with donors, teachers, and community leaders. She had learned to navigate these social situations with grace, but on her own terms, speaking about substance rather than appearances, building genuine connections rather than performing for approval. She was discussing scholarship opportunities with a group of high school counselors when she sensed someone watching her. Though turning slightly, she saw Marcus standing near the entrance, looking older and somehow smaller than she remembered. He wore an expensive suit, but carried himself with none of his former arrogance. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, time seemed suspended as they studied each other, the man who had lost himself to ego and ambition, and the woman who had found herself through service and authenticity. Marcus approached slowly, his expression uncertain. "Alina, you look radiant." "Thank you." Her voice was polite but distant. "I heard about the company. I'm sorry things became difficult after the Vivian situation." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes for long. "I deserved everything that happened. I just wanted you to know that watching you tonight, seeing what you've built, I finally understand. What I threw away? It's not just a wife, but the most genuine person I've ever known." Alina felt no satisfaction in his regret, only a quiet sadness for the time they had both lost. "I hope you find your way back to who you really are, Marcus. Everyone deserves that chance." As he walked away, David appeared at her side with 2 glasses of wine. "You okay?" Alina smiled, watching Marcus disappear into the crowd. "More than okay. For the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I'm meant to be doing." She raised her glass toward the ocean visible through the venue's large windows. The lighthouse beam swept across waters that had always called her home. Here's to new horizons. The future stretched before her like the endless Pacific vast, beautiful and entirely her own to navigate.